There is a tomb in China that has sat sealed for more than 2,000 years, and the people whose entire careers are devoted to studying it are deliberately choosing not to open it, because they believe rivers of liquid poison are waiting inside, and modern instruments say they may be right. There is a tomb in Egypt that killed people who walked into it, and it took science 100 years to work out how. And there is a tomb in Central Asia that, according to the men who cracked it open, was carved with a warning they ignored, 2 days before the bloodiest war in human history fell on their country. So in this video, we're not racing through a long list. We're going deep into just four tombs that humanity, with all its technology, still hesitates to enter. We'll look at what's inside, why it's deadly, and why, in some cases, the smartest move our scientists can make is to leave the door shut. Let's begin with the most famous sealed door on Earth. 1. The tomb of the first emperor, the Lake of Poison. Beneath a quiet, grass-covered hill in central China lies the burial chamber of Qin Shi Huang, the first man to unite China into a single empire, and one of the most powerful and feared rulers who ever lived. He died in 210 BC. His tomb was sealed behind him, and in more than 2,200 years since, no human being has set foot inside the central chamber. Not looters, not invaders, not archaeologists, nobody. You already know the edge of this story, even if you don't realize it, because guarding this tomb is the Terracotta Army, the 8,000 life-sized clay soldiers discovered by farmers digging a well in 1974, each with a unique face, standing in silent ranks to protect their emperor in the afterlife. But here's the thing most people don't grasp. The Terracotta Army is just the outer guard. The emperor himself and his actual burial mound lie somewhere else in the complex, still sealed, still untouched, still waiting. So why won't anyone open it? For that, we have a witness. A Chinese historian named Sima Qian, writing about a century after the emperor's death, described what was built inside. He wrote of a vast underground palace, a ceiling set with pearls and gems to mirror the night sky, crossbows rigged to fire automatically at anyone who broke in, and most chillingly, an entire miniature map of the empire, with its 100 rivers and the Great Sea recreated in flowing, liquid mercury, kept moving by some hidden mechanism. A poisoned model of a kingdom, with rivers of liquid metal sealed in the dark. For centuries, scholars assumed this was poetic exaggeration. Then modern science tested it, without opening a thing. Researchers measured the soil across the burial mound and found mercury concentrations far higher than anything natural. By some surveys, 20 to 50 times the normal level, and concentrated in a pattern that eerily matches the layout of China's actual rivers and coastline. The ancient account appears to be true. There really does seem to be a sea of mercury down there, and a 2020 study concluded something that should make the hair stand up on your neck. That volatile mercury vapor may still be slowly leaking up through cracks in the structure, meaning the tomb is, in a quiet way, still venting poison into the air after 22 centuries. So the danger is real, and it is double. Open that chamber carelessly, and you could release a cloud of toxic mercury vapor on everyone present. But there's a second fear, and to Chinese archaeologists it may matter even more. When the terracotta warriors first came out of the ground, many of them were painted in brilliant color. And within moments of meeting the open air, that paint curled and flaked and vanished forever. They watched priceless history evaporate in front of their eyes. Now imagine that, but it's the greatest sealed tomb in the world. The honest truth is that we may not open the first emperor's tomb for generations, not because we lack the courage, but because we know that the moment we do, we begin to destroy it. Some doors are left shut not out of fear of what gets out, but fear of what we'd lose. Before we move on, I'm curious where you land on this. If you were in charge, would you open it now and finally see what's inside? Or leave it sealed for a future that can do it without ruining it? Tell me what you'd choose below. Because the next tomb wasn't left alone. It was opened, and people started dying. 2. Tutankhamun, the curse that turned out to be real. In November of 1922, in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, the archaeologist Howard Carter did something no one had managed in 3,000 years. He broke through a sealed doorway into the untouched tomb of a teenage pharaoh named Tutankhamun and held up a candle to a room glittering with gold. It is still the most famous archaeological discovery ever made, and almost immediately it became the most infamous, because the people who opened it began to die. First was Carter's wealthy backer, Lord Carnarvon. A few months after entering the tomb, he cut a mosquito bite while shaving. The wound became infected, and he died in a Cairo hotel, delirious with fever. The newspapers went wild. Then others connected to the excavation died too, of pneumonia, of fevers, of sudden collapses. Before long, the world had a number. More than 20 people linked to the tomb were said to have met strange or early deaths. The legend was born, the mummy's curse. The idea that the pharaoh struck down anyone who disturbed his rest. For decades, it was treated as superstition and showmanship, but underneath the myth was something genuinely deadly, something real. Here's what science eventually uncovered. A tomb, sealed for thousands of years, is not an empty stone box. It's a closed environment where the remains of the dead and the food and organic offerings buried with them slowly decay. And in that sealed darkness, certain things grow. Specifically, dangerous molds. Among them, Aspergillus, a fungus whose spores can lie dormant for thousands of years and then, the moment fresh air rushes in and disturbs them, billow up into the lungs of whoever is standing there. In a person who's tired, stressed, or has a weak immune system, those spores can cause severe, even fatal, respiratory infections. And it's not only mold. Sealed tombs can hold toxic gases, ammonia, formaldehyde, hydrogen sulfide, and bacteria coating the walls. The very air of an unopened tomb can be a slow weapon. This is the same killer suspected in another case. In the 1970s, a team opened the tomb of a king in Poland, and within a few years, 10 of the people involved were dead. When investigators examined the tomb, they found it, the same family of toxic fungus waiting in the dark. We'll come back to that one because it deserves its own telling. So was Tutankhamun's curse real? Here's the honest answer, and it's more interesting than a simple yes or no. There is no magic. A pharaoh's spirit did not reach out and strike anyone down. Many of the cursed deaths were ordinary, spread over many years, exactly what you'd expect by chance among a large group of people. And Carter himself, the man most responsible, lived another 16 years. But the fear wasn't entirely baseless either. The danger in a sealed tomb is real, just biological, not supernatural. The ancient Egyptians wrote of a disease that no doctor can diagnose guarding their tombs. They may not have known about microbes, but they knew, somehow, that to break into the house of the dead was to risk something invisible reaching out for you. They were right. They just had the wrong name for it. 3. Tamerlane, the warning carved in stone. In the city of Samarkand, in modern Uzbekistan, stands a magnificent blue-domed mausoleum called the Gur-e-Amir. Inside it, beneath a single block of dark green jade, lies one of the most terrifying conquerors who ever lived, Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane. In the 14th century, he carved out an empire stretching from Turkey to India, and he is estimated to have killed as many as 17 million people in the process. And on his tomb, the story goes, was carved a warning to anyone who might disturb him. The inscription on the stone read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." And there was said to be a second warning, hidden inside the casket itself. "Whoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." For 500 years, Tamerlane lay undisturbed beneath those words. And then, in June of 1941, the most powerful man in the Soviet Union decided he wanted to see the conqueror's face. Joseph Stalin ordered a team of Soviet scientists, led by the anthropologist Mikhail Gerasimov, to travel to Samarkand and open the tomb, to recover the bones and reconstruct what Tamerlane had actually looked like. When they arrived, local elders and Muslim clergy begged them to stop. They warned of the inscription. They warned that opening the grave would bring catastrophe. The scientists, under orders from Stalin himself, ignored them. On June the 20th, 1941, they lifted the heavy jade lid, and the sealed chamber breathed out a sharp, sweet odor of ancient resins and rose and camphor. They removed Tamerlane's bones and prepared to ship them to Moscow for study. 2 days later, on June the 22nd, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in human history. 3 million troops pouring across the Soviet border. The bloodiest war the world has ever seen had arrived, almost to the hour, just as the inscription warned. To this day, across the former Soviet Union, many people are utterly convinced that the scientists unleashed the curse of Tamerlane. Now, let's be honest about this, because honesty is more interesting than mystery. The timing is genuinely chilling, but it is a coincidence. Hitler planned Barbarossa for months. It had nothing to do with a grave in Samarkand. And that sweet smell from the casket wasn't the breath of a curse. It's the exact same scent reported when Egyptian tombs are opened, and it's simply the embalming oils and resins releasing into the air after centuries sealed away. There's even a famous coda to the legend. After the disaster, Tamerlane's remains were eventually reburied with full Islamic honors in late 1942, and shortly after, the Soviets won the brutal turning point battle of Stalingrad. People said the curse was lifted. It's a powerful story, but it's a story. What it really shows is something true about us, how desperately the human mind wants the timing of two terrible things to mean something. Sometimes the only thing connecting them is our need for them to be connected. 4. The tomb of Casimir IV, the one that actually killed. We end with the least famous tomb on this list, and in some ways the most genuinely frightening, because here there is no debate, no coincidence, no myth to wave away. People opened a tomb, people died, and science knows exactly why. In 1973, in the great cathedral on Wawel Hill in Krakow, Poland, a team of researchers opened the 400-year-old tomb of King Casimir IV Jagiellon, a Polish monarch buried in 1492. It was meant to be a routine, respectful examination of a royal grave. It became a horror story, because in the months and years that followed, the people who had been present at the opening began to die. Within a few years, 10 of the roughly dozen people involved were dead, many of them relatively young, and many from similar causes, respiratory and lung-related illness. To anyone watching, it looked exactly like the mummy's curse come to Europe. The press called it precisely that, the curse of Casimir. But this time, scientists investigated properly, and they found the killer. When they sampled the tomb, the air, and the remains, they discovered it was thick with toxic fungi, Aspergillus flavus, among others, the same dormant, sealed tomb mold we met in Egypt. For 5 centuries, it had grown in the dark, sealed environment of the king's grave. The moment the researchers opened it and disturbed the ancient material, they breathed in a cloud of microscopic spores. And for those with vulnerable lungs, it was a death sentence that took months or years to fall. The curse was a fungus. The supernatural explanation dissolved, and a far more useful one took its place. A hard, scientific lesson about the very real biological dangers waiting inside sealed historic spaces. A lesson that now shapes how every careful archaeologist approaches a freshly opened tomb, with masks, with caution, with respect for what they cannot see. And there's a strange, almost hopeful twist to end on. That same deadly fungus from Tutankhamun and from Casimir's tomb, Aspergillus flavus, is now being studied by modern researchers who found it produces compounds that show real promise as a weapon against cancer. The thing that grew in the house of the dead, that fed the legend of the pharaoh's curse, may one day help save the living. The poison and the cure, hiding in the same darkness. So look at what actually ties these four tombs together. A lake of mercury still leaking poison after 2,000 years. A pharaoh's chamber where invisible spores waited 100 lifetimes to fill someone's lungs. A conqueror's warning that happened to align with the start of a war. And a king's grave that quietly killed 10 people and taught us why. In every single case, the curse was real, but it was never magic. It was chemistry. It was biology. It was the measurable, physical danger of opening a sealed door that was never meant to be opened. And maybe that's the most unsettling thought of all. We tell ourselves that curses are superstition, that we've outgrown the fears of the ancient world. But the ancients who carved warnings onto these tombs weren't entirely wrong. They sensed that disturbing the dead carried a real risk. They just described it in the only language they had. We have better words now. Mercury, aspergillus, vapor pressure, spores. But the warning underneath is the same one, and it's still true. Some doors are sealed for a reason. And just because we can open them doesn't always mean we should. So tell me, which of these four would you least want to be the first to walk into? And I always wonder how far these stories travel, so let me know what part of the world you're watching from. The dead, it turns out, still have ways of protecting their secrets. See you next time.